This Thursday morning, let's get into this, have a look at the economy. According to the International Monetary Fund's forecast, South Africa's economic virtues are expected to turn for the better. The Brettenwoods group has revised the country's economic outlook up by 1%, moving it from 4% to 5%. That seems to be a healthier picture from the earlier forecast, which South Africa's revised growth, it was down basically from 6% to 4% in July. The results are published on the IMF's latest World Economic Report for the world's major markets, and the group is forecasting that global economic recovery is set to continue despite the resurgence of COVID-19. Sifiso Skenjana, he is an economist and executive head at the Research and Strategic Advisory at IQbusiness, and he joins us now virtually. Great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Morning, Leanne. Great to be here.
So I suppose we can be cautiously optimistic about this growth in forecast from, 4 to 5%. What do you think? Has this taken us a little by surprise, or is it within expectations?
I think it is a positive surprise, and I think if we unpack it a little bit, we can start to see also the way in which they've been articulating some of the things that are motivating them to revise that growth number upwards. One of the things, of course, is that compared to the developed markets who are having big supply chain shortages, we aren't experiencing negative impacts on the back of that. In fact, because we are a large exporter of vehicles, the microchip shortage that's happening in a global context actually is pushing prices up from a vehicle export point of view. And so that's something we are likely to benefit from. We also saw, of course, that some of our other sectors like agriculture are starting to look a little bit better. And we saw, of course, our telco and transport sector also coming up quite nicely at the last GDP numbers. And so when you look at that in balance, as well as then seeing what's been happening with commodity prices remaining quite elevated, developed economies that are commodity heavy like South Africa start to become beneficiaries of that. And so I think when you look at that in context, I think the picture for our growth is a good surprise, but I think also we could see some of it coming in.
Look, it is a good surprise, but it is needed. If we look back to where we were a year ago, when we look at where we were in July as well, and July was a very, very bleak time in South Africa's history where billions was lost in terms of, the so-called insurrection, and this is something that we need to keep in the back of our mind. We're coming out of COVID. So, would you say that unfortunately, it's so low, there is only one way, and that is up? We need to grow this economy.
No, we have to grow the economy, but I think we also have to ensure that we put the fundamentals back in place. And, the fundamentals are the things that are going to ensure that small businesses grow, because we do know that small businesses are the ones that really do employ people as well. And so when you look at the very bleak employment outlook that we currently are sitting within, that those are some of the things now we should be really leaning into. We've seen also government release a gazette, particularly in the cement industry, saying for all government infrastructure projects, no cement imports, must be used. And these are all the things around creating a circular economy in the South Africa, accelerating localization. These are the things that are supposed to help the economy really find some sustenance and sustainable growth. We do know that in South Africa, there has been a period where we do see growth looking better, but inequality is still not getting better, employment not getting better. And this is why, Leanne, I'm saying that those fundamentals are really going to be critical for us to continue focusing on to ensure that we get on a good growth path.
I want to ask on a more positive note, and one of the points that the IMF did raise in this report was basically saying, even though this was a modest revision, it does, however, it is very much so in favor of South Africa, because a lot of other countries actually had more of a downgrade and a revised down forecast. So South Africa actually looking a lot better than perhaps other countries. Maybe you can tell us firstly why and which playing field are we in, that what countries we're comparing ourselves to?
I think, as I said, that they looked at, of course, in context of some of the developed economies. And what's happening in those economies, as I said, is that there is supply chain disruptions that are actually constraining the growth opportunities or the growth outlook. We saw, for example, in the US, they keep missing their numbers by hundreds of thousands in terms of employment expectations. But also in the poorer economies, low-income economies, we're starting to see again that a lot of the effects of the pandemic are trickling in deeper than they expected. And so South Africa is sitting somewhere in terms of being a middle-income country, having a strong commodity base, is really benefiting currently on the back of some of these shifts. I think also in the context of the impacts that were probably priced in on the riots that we saw in particular Gauteng and KZN, those now are probably also starting to seep through into the economy, and the economy is starting to rebuild. And I think those are some of the things that are starting to give credence to the numbers we're seeing. I think in addition, institutional quality in South Africa is starting to look better, and by that we can look at how busy the Hawks are in terms of really rooting out some of the problematic elements there, as well as, of course, we're starting to see investment coming back from business, in terms of capital stocks. So there is certainly some of the things that are starting to move in the right direction, and we've just got to make sure that we create a good foundation for them to stay there.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you and I can sit and talk about the percentages and the numbers and the IMF and the forecasts and the growth. But to most of the people watching, they don't really care, and it doesn't mean anything in their lives, because when you wake up in the morning and you have no running water, then you have no electricity, and we've just come out of a cycle of load shedding, which, who knows, maybe this afternoon they'll tell us it's back, where, service delivery is one of the biggest issues in this country, and most importantly, job creation. And I know you've alluded to it so much. So when you look at what percentage the IMF, it doesn't matter to people. Hungry stomachs is what matters to people, and the lack of service delivery. So, when do we start getting around this? Because that's really what it all means. So, I mean, numbers like this, do they indicate a better life for South Africans, or is this just all on paper?
I think as it stands, it's mostly on paper. We've seen our inequality numbers worsen. We saw recent household income numbers coming out of UCT as well, showing that almost 60% of South Africans are living on less than 1,000 rand a month. We also know that in context of job search, the cost of job search in South Africa goes between 300 and 500 rand a month. And so if you're coming from a low-income household, that is a lot of money just to look for a job. And so people in that income bracket end up becoming discouraged much quicker. And we've also seen in South Africa a period of 13 years where we had what we call jobless growth. So the economy was kind of growing, but jobs weren't following suit. And so when we look at these numbers, as I said, it's critical for us to say, is the right infrastructure in place to actually really support growth for the ordinary South African? When we look at the delivery capacity of municipalities, for example, are we taking into account just how much of a risk to the sustenance and livelihoods of ordinary people when those municipalities, 87% of them have got financial management challenges? So these are all the things that will start to actually transform the lives of ordinary South Africans, creating, smart township economies, ensuring that a lot of the real opportunities from our infrastructure investments, for example, are trickling into the spaces where the people are. And particular focus, Leanne, on young people. We, as a country, aren't investing enough on research and development. And that's where a lot of the innovative young people currently are. And when you've got an economy that's not absorbing the young people, that's the space that you should create space for them to really bring in all of these innovations, smart thinking, fresh thinking. And those are the people who are going to inherit this country. And so let's give them the space to transform us and put us on a real growth path.
Yeah. And, I'm so with you on this. And that is the one part of any country where we look at the youth, and the youth is so important. And yet here in South Africa, the youth are the ones that are suffering the most right now. There are no jobs. They are the highest unemployed rate. We're moving into elections right now, and it might be the very first time that a lot of South Africans are voting in these upcoming elections. And many will stay away from the polls because they just feel like, why? What is this country doing for me? And it's a big problem. I mean, and we also noticed during this particular COVID time that, you know, the reach of connectivity, the reach of the internet, the reach of getting South Africans online and allowing people to create these businesses you so speak to is something there, again, where we're letting the youth down. What more needs to be done? How do we invest in the youth of this country?
My views, Leanne, are always that our answers are closer to us than we think. I'll make an example. When we were in a hard lockdown, level 4, level 5, e-commerce was taking place. Why did we not ensure that some of the big providers from an e-commerce point of view in South Africa are mandated to bring in small businesses, particularly from certain localizations? If you look, I always say South Africa has got these parallel economies from an informal point of view as well as a formal, right? The sector that employs a lot of young black women in South Africa is the care industry. And so you'll see them in the informal space. And so you'll see them with hair salons, etc. But there's also a very kind of mature formal sector there in terms of, the pharma retail space and a lot of the kind of beauty and care space. So why don't we ensure that we leverage procurement to bring these people into more formal economy, to give them access to market opportunity and to enterprise development? We see the same thing with young black men, that a lot of them are in the fitment space, and we've got an established automotive industry and OEM industry. Why don't we bring those guys on board and ensure that they come in as part of the feeder system into the work that goes into fixing cars, etc. These are industries that already exist and they're running in parallel and they're not talking to each other. Yet on the one side, there is the mature industry. So I'm just saying, very quickly, low-hanging fruit, let's just use what we've already got. Let's use the people who do have those businesses, then bring them on board, give them market discovery, and then you'll see the kind of sustainable growth that we need to see.
Yeah, love it. It's so important, it really is. And it's nice speaking to someone like you because you are young. You have got these ideas, and I can see these light bulbs behind you. I know it's a virtual screen. So, but these are the ideas that push us forward, and we need to listen to these ideas, and government needs to do something about them. I mean, e-commerce is massive, and you're right. Let's bring these emerging e-commerce guys into it and talk more to that. Just as we sort of get to the end of this conversation, I just want to find out, I brought out very briefly the unrest that we saw in South Africa in July. I mean, was this factored into the IMF report and, you know, events that we saw unfolding in Quebec yesterday and worries that, you know, this is, again, another big problem when it comes to lawlessness in the country. What does this do for future prospects?
Sure. I mean, it's incredibly difficult because, so firstly, yes, it is factored into those. And I mean, I think when the Reserve Bank recently announced, the interest rate in South Africa, they often spoke around how a lot of the initial gains that we had seen coming out of the second quarter would have been wiped out by the insurrection, etc. And so it really did have a dampening effect on our economic growth prospects. But I think, when you look at it in a particular context, first and foremost is what does it do? It makes it difficult for some businesses to invest because if it happens again, those are their life savings wiped out. And we've seen Sasria now start coming out and only giving caps on insured amounts on the back of any political unrest. So one, it lowers investment, it lowers sense of confidence from the local economy supporting those businesses because of that. But also, I think there's a social fabric that gets damaged every time this process kind of takes place. There becomes mistrust and distrust between us as South Africans. And so we don't also support each other anymore because some of the things seem to be racially charged when they may not necessarily be. And so I think it's really just a basket of bad and wicked problems that we've really just got to ensure that we create a sustainable base for people to have sustainable lives, and so to be able to express themselves economically, access health, access education correctly, and of course then be able to find opportunities for jobs, but at the same time to ensure that the rule of law continues to be, accelerated in the way in which it's pressed. Intelligence gets accelerated so that we can monitor these things before they happen, because they really are damaging for the fabric of our economy.
Right, we leave it there for this morning, Sifiso. Thank you very, very much for talking to us here on the program. Sifiso Skenjana, he is Chief Economist and Executive Head at the Research and Strategic Advisory at IQbusiness. And that, of course, discussing the IMF's latest World Economic Report, which predicts an economic growth basically of 1% from the original forecast of 4 to 5.